Viewers, I'm sure by now you've heard about the great semiconductor shortage that the world is witnessing. The chip shortage. Some are even calling it the semiconductor famine because that's how grave this crisis has become. It's a full-blown crisis. And it impacts many parts of our lives. We don't even know it yet if it continues in this manner. From our television sets to our smartphones, to the screens on any of our gadgets, to our cars, and so much more, uses this specific electronic device. And if the world continues to see a shortage in the supply of this electronic item, then all of these industries will go for a toss, and they are already. Tonight, I want to talk to you about this shortage, why it's taking place, and what is the impact. And we are going to put a larger focus in the car industry. Now, essentially, what has happened is that in pandemic times, the demand for semiconductor chips went up. Because obviously people were buying more and more of these electronics. Everybody was working from home, everybody needed additional gadgets, additional devices, and so the demand went up. But in pandemic times, the supply could not go up. In fact, for many of the big manufacturers, the supply got hit because the factories got shut down and because the raw materials even for them became a problem. And as that happened, that was the first sign of a crisis. Now, as the world began to open up again after the initial rounds of lockdown and slowdown in activity, the demand for more semiconductor chips took place. And the manufacturers haven't been able to catch up. So now you have a situation where automobile companies are cutting down their production across the world. It's not an India-specific thing. Across the world, automobile companies are cutting down their passenger car production because they don't have the semiconductors. Smartphone companies have begun to redraw their plans. Apple's spoken about it. Samsung has spoken about it. From Volkswagen to Ford to Maruti and Mahindra, all of their plans have been impacted. Soon it will also be your gaming console, by the way. That also depends largely on these chips. And there is really no way out. The countries have, some of them have begun to draw designs and schemes to step up on their own production, but it's manufacturing of a component. It can't be done overnight. We just have to deal with this shortage. Let's talk about it. And I want to focus on this tonight, even though this has been a problem for a while, because usually around festival time, we see an increase in demand for cars, for example. This time it seems the dealers and the manufacturers may not be able to service that demand. However low that festival car demand may be, they may not be able to service that demand because they don't have the cars. The wait for many of the cars currently in our market is 4 to 8 months. Many of you who've attempted to buy a car or book a car will know that. 4 to 8 months. I say good evening to Rajeev Singh, partner and automotive leader of Deloitte India, Pankaj Doval, senior editor for Times of India, Mr. Vinkesh Gulati, president for Federation of Automobile Dealer Association, Arun Malhotra, former MD for Nissan, an auto industry veteran, and Homer Sorabji, editor for Autocar, also joining me this evening. Thank you so much. Mr. Gulati, I wanted to start off with you. I read the statement by the Dealers Association and the comments that you've made. But for our viewers to understand just how grave is the situation in terms of the inventory, the number of cars you have or you may get during this festival season.
So, hi, Tanvi. Thanks for having me. No doubt it's a very, very bad situation. Festive season is a time when dealers look forward to for the full year because these 2 months we normally sell equivalent to 4.5 months sale. but the current situation is not so. Since the COVID lockdowns in 2020, we are grappling with the situation of a demand supply gap. But because last year the sales weren't that good, it went off well. But because of the semiconductor as of today, we are facing a big problem. So, normal process is that we see enter the festive season. So normally festive season we have around 45 to 50 days or 40 to 45 days stocks in the car dealerships. But as of now, we are entering at 20 to 25 days. And what we are seeing for the past June and July, the average production which hovered around 3 lakh vehicle is as of today at 2.5. And in the current month, the kind of projections given by Maruti and other companies, even Mahindra, it's coming to something around 1.5 lakh, which means that even the current demand, the current month demand will also be not produced as of now. So leave apart the festive planning, we'll be even grappling to satisfy the customers for the September month only, and it will be difficult for us to manage that. So it really that festive is a wash off from our side.
Well, that's really, really concerning to hear. I mean, and this is just, at a time when demand has been down and out for so long. And now we are saying that even if there are people who may be wanting to buy cars, they won't be able to, Mr. Rajiv Singh. I was looking at some of the waiting period that already exists for many of these cars. Mahindra Tihar, it's up to 1 year. Hyundai's Creta, up to 9 months. Maruti's Ertiga, the waiting period is up to 8 months. Nissan Magnite up to 7 months, and so on, so forth, across the board, from Tata to Renault, all of the other companies as well. Is there a way out? How long do you see this crisis continue, Mr. Singh?
So thanks a lot, Tanvi, for having me here. Actually, this crisis started some time back, and this is not just the COVID time. Actually, the alarm bells started going up even before the COVID. And there was already a noise to say that the demand for chips is going up because, as you rightly said, anything and everything around us has chips. And so if you look at FY20, let me go a year back. And globally, there was a strong demand for chips, which was going up, and auto industry was seeing significant amount of shortage. I think somewhere starting the second half of FY20 onwards, and come FY21, which is from January onwards. So January, February, March, the first quarter of this year, globally we saw a loss of production of close to about 1.5 million units globally. In the second quarter, the loss of production went up to 2.5 million units. And just to give it in context, we do about, say, 18 million units in a quarter. So out of 15, 18 million units, seeing about 1.5 million units, 2.5 million units not being produced just because of shortage of chips is a significantly higher impact. And this is the third quarter. And the third quarter, we are likely to see a similar kind of impact, just like the second quarter. I think the fourth quarter, the impact could be lower. It could be about 1.5 million units globally. And come FY22, I think the later half of FY22 is when we should expect there be some kind of stabilization in terms of the supply-demand situation.
Okay, interesting that you say that. This is going to go on for a while, and you rightly said it's been a problem that's been festering and then got magnified in the pandemic times. Hormaz, do comment on this issue, and how long do you see this crisis continue? And on a side note, if I do want to buy a car, is there any brand that exists right now which may be immediately available with bare minimum chips?
Well, I think the advice is hang on to your existing car. And that's causing a problem in the used car market also because there's no supply there.
Yeah.
So there's even shortage in the used car market for this very reason that people are hanging on to their existing cars because they have to wait for a long time to get a new one. So really it's, the ripple effect is throughout. But, I think it's, as everyone has said, it looks like it's going to extend into 2022. But the Munich show is just going on, and we've heard, let's say, announcements or messages from some of the CEOs there that they feel it might even extend into 23. So that's how chronic it is. And I think at the end of the day, what's going to be the most important thing is not what new models you launch, not how good your car is, but just how you manage the supply chain. And this is going to be key for I think every manufacturer. I think this is what is taking up most of their time, is just how to manage the supply of these chips in the most optimal way. I think what I also see is in the short term, manufacturers maybe changing their variant mix and pushing out variants which have a lower chip content, and those are typically slightly the lower variants where the electronic content isn't that high. But yes, it is a chronic problem. No real short term
So,
end in sight.
so let me
And
ask you this, Thomas. How
yeah.
did it become so chronic, to the point that we are right now? And are the car manufacturers also having to compete with smartphone guys and gaming console guys or any other industry? Are the makers of these chips the same?
Well, it is. So it's a combination of reasons. Obviously, it started with COVID. So with COVID, the automakers felt that demand was going to fall off a cliff, and they kind of rolled back to their so-called chip orders. Now, the chip manufacturers diverted that to other industries, frankly, which account for a larger proportion of chips. In fact, the auto industry accounts for just about 12-13% of the total global chip production. Also, then what happened is that with work from home, the demand for gaming consoles, computers, all the kind of work from home electronics went up. So there was a huge spike in demand for that, and subsequently even a chip demand for that. Then a lot of chip manufacturers have had problems again due to COVID shutdowns. There, some have got fire right now in Malaysia. There's a massive problem with this, which in Malaysia is really a key, let's say, a source for chips. Not so much for making, but they do the validation and the packaging for chips. So it's there in the supply chain, and that's having COVID problems right now. So let's say shutdowns because of COVID. So it's just a factor of all this that has really hammered the auto industry. And I think also what the auto industry didn't expect was demand to bounce back so fast. So, chip guys have said, sorry, guys, you are low down in the pecking order. When you wanted chips, you said you didn't want them. And now there are other industries which want them, so that they've got the priority. And that's just how it is. The auto industry isn't, believe it or not, the highest priority for the chip industry as it stands.
Yes, and I understand there's another complication to that. Pankaj, good evening to you. And that's that within the auto industry as well, those who are making electric vehicles are ordering 10 times the amount of chips as well. And so that's also taking a large share away. Is that also a significant concern for the automakers themselves and actually automobile buyers?
Absolutely, absolutely. Chips are being increasingly used in all the cars, and we are moving from cars that used to move us from point A to point B to very smart cars today. And an average car could have maybe 80 to 100 or even 150 chips installed in the vehicle. So this problem coming at a time when we are talking about transition to electrics. Obviously, this is a big dampener to that movement, and companies will have to find out ways to at least move in this direction now.
So what are the options for the Indian manufacturers? Where do we stand now, Pankaj, in this global fight, for the semiconductors?
We don't have many options. We've seen Maruti announce a 60% production cut just before the festive season. We've seen Mahindra announce a production cut. Tata Motors announce a production cut. We don't manufacture chips in India. And as Hormaz was rightly saying, a large part of the production was actually diverted to the electronic industry by the chip makers. Because last year, the automakers were in a very gloomy mood because of the pandemic, and most of them actually cut down on their orders for semiconductors and all these chips. So because of that, we do not have that much of committed suppliers of chips in India. So there's not much we can do, and that's the reason that we are looking at such kind of a waiting period that even stretches up to 1 year. So not much can be done at this point in time. And Hormaz is right. You should hold on to the cars that you have at this point.
Well, I must say that I do know somebody who I was fed up with the current car and sold it off thinking that they're going to get another one in a couple of weeks. And is now stranded because the new car is not going to come for 5 months, and that's completely put everything, off the schedule. But let's get to the larger point. And Mr. Malhotra, thank you for patiently waiting, but I wanted to just set the context for a lot of our viewers before I dig into insights from you. How did the car manufacturers not see this coming? Such an integral part of the product that they make and sell, which is, in the hands of very limited manufacturers across the world.
So, what Horvaz mentioned was very correct. There are three things happened. One, obviously, the car industry took a big hit. And the recovery of the car industry in India was much sharper. In India, also in other countries. Second, what is happening also, the amount of semiconductors required or electronic chips required in vehicles is going up because customers' aspirations is going up. So a combination of these two factors led to it. And what's happened, the COVID too caused a lot of problems because in the April to June quarter, there was shortage of production also, but they could not ramp up. And the problem is further compounded. What is available in the market even is available at very high prices. So you are in a catch-22 situation. One side, you don't have any chips. Second, whatever is available also is available at a high price. So these are the challenges. But I just want to give one silver lining. We've been discussing on cars. But frankly, the situation on two-wheelers and commercial vehicles is much better. So that's the only silver lining in the auto industry. And they also contribute part to it. But within the car industry, vehicles which are lower in the pecking order, which have low electronics, which are more entry level, probably the chances of producing more are better there. So clearly, situation is very grim, and I don't see, and the auto companies thought they will get it, because in the last 7-8 years, never has been a crisis of getting semiconductors or auto industry. So there was a sense of complacency, and when this problem came, there was no reply. That's the way the situation stands today.
Mr. Malhotra, is there possibility of a larger ripple effect in this industry? The industry has gone through such a tough time in the last few years, any which ways. Add to that now this new, very grave problem. For example, the dealers, even the auto part manufacturers. I mean, who's going to be buying those parts if they're not making the cars to sell them in the market?
So there is a larger problem, clearly, because companies which already have been struggling, I mean, production is low, the company's profitability goes low. And dealers even, I mean, this is the time. I mean, the sales in our country are very skewed. And with this problem happening in Malaysia in September, October, Ganesh Chaturthi is day after tomorrow, and Navratra sets in 7th October. So the problem is low. So the dealer profitability, which was always a challenge and which Venkesh would bear it out, will be further impacted because this was the time to make it up. So this is one thing. The only silver lining is dealer stocks are low. So dealer interest costs on vehicles are low, but that's not a big consoling factor. But I think the challenge will remain, and you can't do much about it at this point of time.
Yeah, and I think that seems to be the worst part, that you can't do much about it. Mr. Rajiv Singh, why is that? For example, United States and the US President himself over 6 months ago, signed executive orders to look at ramping up production in the country. Now, obviously, that won't change anything overnight, but won't they at least be in a better off position at least 6 months from now or a year from now if this crisis worldwide is going to continue till 23?
So Tanvi, before coming to that, I'll just add to the previous question that you asked to Arun as well. And just to add, see, one of the challenges that I find the auto industry has always had is working on this philosophy of just in time for almost anything and everything that the industry buys. And at times when the concentration risk at the supplier's end is very, very high, which means that there are very few suppliers for certain products. And it is not just a particular OEM, but many OEMs who are buying from the same supplier. And it's not just the auto industry, but even other industries who are buying from the same supplier. That is when you say that the concentration risk is very, very high. And when the risk is very high with certain set of suppliers, I think one needs to also think, what is my supply chain strategy, procurement strategy in such cases? And while we today talk, Tanvi, about say chips, I would not be surprised if a few months down the line, or maybe not a few months, maybe a couple of years down the line, we talk about say batteries very similarly, because there also concentration risk is very, very high. So we need to really think slightly long term in terms of how do you secure the entire value chain. And now coming to the point that you had, Tanvi, is that we need to think of this entire value chain. And it is not easy to ramp up production. Chip manufacturing is a highly capital intensive manufacturing setup. It is not something that can be set up in a small span of 6 months or a year's time. It takes a slightly longer time. And even the equipments which go into chip manufacturing are extremely specialized, which means that even the equipment manufacturers which supply equipments into a chip manufacturing plant are under severe constraint in terms of their capacity. That's the reason why there is no easy answer at this point in time. It's like a competition between different supply chains across different industries. And is it possible for auto to secure the supply over the next few quarters or maybe over a next year from whatever is the existing capacity? There have been a few challenges, like, of course, we heard about the challenge in Malaysia. There was a fire, for example, in one of the plants in Japan, which was not really a chip manufacturer, but it was a fiberglass manufacturer which goes into the chip manufacturing. So it's a tier two to chip manufacturing in that sense. So with some of those problems getting solved or sorted, I think the situation will improve slowly. But there is also a geopolitical equation to it, which you hinted in some manner, because the players in US, the players in Europe would not really want to put too much of manufacturing in a particular geography. They would want it to be more distributed, I think. So that is what is going to be important as we go ahead.
Actually, that's a fact, Hormaz, right now as we speak, right? That a lot of the manufacturing is concentrated in Asia.
So currently the manufacturing is largely concentrated in Asia, that's right. So it's between Taiwan, it's between South Korea, and to a certain extent, China. And I recollect that a year back, there were some strict regulations put, and one of the Chinese companies was blacklisted. And that's the reason why the demand from that particular company, which was getting fulfilled for US and Europe, could not, the products could not come from that Chinese company going ahead.
Yes.
And the demand shifted towards Taiwan and South Korea, further accentuating the problem.
Yes. Okay. The one point that you raised, and I wanted to speak a little bit more about it, and Hormaz, maybe you can come on that, is the supply chain itself. Bosch made a comment a few weeks ago as well, and just to quote them, they said the semiconductor supply chains in the car industry no longer work. What does that mean exactly, and then how do the car manufacturers fix it?
Well, look, supply chain is a very, very complex, let's say, part of the car making process, which has really evolved over a century. I mean, it's being turned on its head by a lot of people. I mean, for example, Tesla is very vertically integrated. It makes a lot of key things maybe in-house where other suppliers would outsource it. I think it's something which, with something like the semiconductor issue, you can't have some knee-jerk reaction and try and change things around, which have really worked quite well for the auto industry. Yes, they need to be more agile, they need to be more flexible, they need to take into account all the other kind of, let's say, factors beyond people's control, geopolitics, that sort of thing. But, coming to something like chips, it's very easy to say now everyone should get into making chips. Doesn't work like that. Don't forget, chips are frankly commodities, and like chips, they are not something super high tech. The technology comes from the people who own the IP of the chip, and then they gave it to their suppliers to make. So, all these factors have to be made into account. So, does it make sense to start for countries or even other certain suppliers to get into this space? I don't think so. I think the fact is that, right now it's a perfect storm, a combination of factors that is causing this. And I think a simple thing like COVID easing things up, hopefully, that situation will be better. Factories won't have restrictions, they won't have production disruptions, and things will start getting back to normal. And so I think, one has to kind of take a sort of slightly long-term view of this and just kind of bear what is happening. We have no choice in the short term.
Well, I think you're right there. It's extremely complicated, the supply chain and the entire process itself, something that Elon Musk seems to have discovered just today when he tweeted saying that production is hard. Production with positive cash flow is extremely hard, and that was endorsed by Anand Mahindra, who replied to that saying, yes, we've known it for a few decades, and we continue to, sweat and slave away. That seems to be the plight of the auto manufacturers. What about the dealers, Mr. Gulati? And I come back to you. If this crisis is going to continue for some time, what does that mean for the auto dealers?
So Tanvi, yes, it's a difficult situation. See, we have just come out of two lockdowns, 2 months each, and normally as a dealer, we were always expecting when the COVID wave, the crisis goes away, the scare goes away, we'll be able to cover up the loss what we have done during that time. But the things are not like this. So talking about the chips, I remember I just had a talk with one of the senior plant guy today in the morning, and he said normally we used to give 10 minutes in a month's time for planning on chips, and today everybody is giving hours on chip, and but still we are not able to achieve what we want to. So similar with us also, we are fighting with our manufacturers to at least give what they have committed, or cover up the stocks what we have committed to the dealers, the customers. We have taken bookings, and we are actually the foot soldiers, and we are facing the customers day in, day out, and it's becoming very difficult. So the kind of frustrations customer has, because buying a car or any vehicle is a landmark event for a person. Normally he buys what, two, three or four cars in his lifetime. And at this time, the bigger issue is that we are entering at the cusp of festive, where it's an auspicious occasion. It's normally not that if I'm not getting a car now, I can take it a week later. He normally gets a religious date, auspicious date taken out. And if we dealers are not able to give it, it's a bigger problem for us. And normally what we are always fighting for lead generation, closure of leads, satisfying customers, and taking a booking. And then the supply was never an issue for us. But today it's more of a bigger issue. Instead of fighting for leads, we are fighting for not refunding the customer, because customers are canceling the vehicle because we
So
are not able.
instead of chasing the customers, you may want to hide from the angry customers whose cars haven't come and may not for a while. The world is upside down right now in these COVID times, Mr. Gulati, and that's what it's come down to in every segment. Thank you to all of you for joining me on this conversation and sharing your insights and helping us understand better what's going on. Simple thing is that, like our expert said, you may want to push off on that decision of buying a car if the model that you're looking at, the kind of car that you're looking at, is not available in the market and won't be for a while. 4 months to 8 months, 9 months, even up to a year. And all experts and car manufacturers, not just in India but across the world, are saying that this situation is getting worse. It started off in about December 2020, when the car manufacturers again began to place orders for more semiconductor chips and realized there weren't enough in the market. And since then, it's just become worse and worse. And now experts are saying it's going to continue at least for another 6 months to 1 year, maybe more. There is no way out but to ride out this tough phase for the manufacturers and the dealers. That just means tougher times for them in the days to come. Thank you for joining us on this conversation.